Alright, hello everybody and welcome back to the Superlight Coupe build. In this video I'll do a little bit of a recap of what I've been up to the last few weeks, so stay tuned. Okay, well the last video we were preparing the engine for the install into the chassis, and as you can see the LT4 is now mounted in the Superlight Coupe chassis. Let's see, before we talk about the engine and the fitment and a number of other things, let me get you caught up on a couple items that I did. So when we did the last body fitment, I mentioned that I needed to, I'm looking at the bottom front right suspension, I had to turn the hind joint out here a couple turns. And there's a stack of washers in front of the hind joint and behind the hind joint. And it's really difficult to get to them, but I wound up making a tool that holds those washers in place. You can fool around with the thickness of the washers and then you simply plug the A-arm back in. So that worked out really well. Also, a number of months ago, I fabricated the bottom closeout panel, which is this here. And I was going to weld that in the chassis, but I thought better of it. And I wound up using some flathead screws and silicone sealer and bonded that panel to the under chassis. So now I have the rear and the bottom of the fuel tank closed out. I do have a top closeout panel that's going to need some adjustment. So we'll cover that in a future video. And then lastly, you see the evaporator canister, and that's a 2015 Corvette evap canister. So all the evap components are from a 2015 Corvette. I even have the capless fuel filler neck from a Corvette that I'll add and mount that under the Sparco cap. So yeah, when I go to get this thing inspected, it's going to be 100% a 2015 Corvette Z06 from an emission standpoint. Okay, so let's segue over to the engine. All right, well, let's take a closer look at the engine. So, it definitely fits. I had the clam on temporarily, and I will tell you the clam clears the back of the supercharger cover by about 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't clear this fuel inlet tube, so I literally am going to have to find a way to bend that down. But anyway, those rear engine mounts basically position the engine perfectly, and then the front engine mount certainly does its job and lined up really well. You can see it peeking through there. Let's see, a couple other comments here. Things are pretty close. That compressor clears the frame. The belt's probably 1/4 of an inch off. Now the engine should not torque much because it's on solid mounts, but who knows? I may have to shave that down a little bit. And let's see, it also cleared the, they call this the K-brace, cleared the K-brace, and even the factory coil covers clear the, these down bars, and also clear the rear window. So I'm feeling pretty good about things. So at this point, I'm basically mocking up all the items in the rear compartment, so I feel good about the layout. They're serviceable, they look right, and they're functional. Okay, so we'll take a closer look at the mocked up items. Okay, so there are a number of items I have to find locations for, and once again there's not a lot of room back here. And I really want to locate all these items, but still have the engine serviceable. So I'll sort of explain that a little bit. But let's see, the first thing I'll mention, we've got the header tank. I'm going to buy this Moroso round header tank, and that's like 1.5 quarts. And then we'll have a recovery tank down here. More than likely, I'll just build that and weld it up out of aluminum so I could put the fittings exactly where I'd like them to be. You see you have the fuel neck here, and this fuel neck is going to be skinnier, and it's going to feed that Corvette Z06 fuel filler neck, which is a capless fuel filler neck, so that's pretty cool. The other thing is I'm going to run the coolant tube basically the way I had it mocked up. So it's going to go close to the rear closeout panel, so it goes behind the dry sump oil tank. But I also want to keep the cooling tubes close to the rear closeout panel because I want to be able to get the serpentine belts off without having to move the engine back or move the coolant tubes. And the way I have them organized now, I should be able to do that, both the accessory belt and also the supercharger belt. Okay, so I'm waiting for some silicone hose ends, and if I could get those to line up with the mocked up coolant tubes, then I will cut them out of stainless steel and finish them up. Okay, so I think that's it for the passenger side. Let's segue over to the driver's side. Okay, well, we're over on the driver's side now, and a couple things to point out. So let's start with the cooling tubes. You know, similar to the passenger side, we're going to run these cooling tubes against the back of the fuel tank area closeout panel. Basically keep that tube away from the tensioner and the belt for the supercharger. The supercharger belt comes out further, and I do want to be able to change those without having to disconnect cooling tubes, etc. I'm not sure if this is going to be the final location. I may bring this down more. I'm thinking about maybe putting an auxiliary electric water pump there, and it needs to feed down below. Haven't thought that all the way through. Here you see an intercooler pump bracket, and here you see a mock-up of a lithium battery. So I'm going to go with a lithium battery. It's about half the size of a regular battery, and it only weighs about 5 pounds. And then here's really what ties it all together. You know, I fabricated this a while ago. It's not welded up, but I've been trimming it and fitting it in the area. And that is the throttle body intake elbow, or relocating elbow. And you can see it fits in the car. And, you know, if we take a peek here, I've got about a quarter of an inch gap between the roll bar for the seat belts and that intake elbow. More than likely I'll move the bar for the seat belt forward, or I'll attach some tabs and bolt the belts on. I don't want those belts wrapping around and pressing up against something warm. Wouldn't be good for the nylon belts. But anyway, this sort of shows where I'm at. Now, what I'm going to do next is we're going to get the body on the car. I really have to finalize the intake elbow and the air intake and filter assembly, and I can't do that without the body on the car. And then I have to find a place for the intercooler tank. So, you know, that may be down here, that may be over here, but too close to the engine it'll heat soak, or maybe down here. So anyway, we'll figure that out. All right, so I think the next segment will be the final. We'll segue with the body on the car, and we'll take a look at the air intake assembly. Okay, well, we got the body on the car, and that really allowed me the opportunity to fine-tune some of the things that I needed to focus on, and it's primarily this intake elbow and how to route the intake tube So this is actually the design I have at the moment. And I trimmed up the intake elbow a little bit and got it to fit really well. You've got the elbow, the throttle body. I've got a 3 3/4 inch to 4 inch silicone elbow. And then I've got what essentially is a mock-up of the actual aluminum tubes that I'm planning on purchasing. So here's a template, and you can see it follows almost perfectly. So I've got to put the body on the car, but from everything I see, or the rear clam on the car, from everything I see, you know, getting this pipe down a little more, because this angles down and then the body angles up, it should clear pretty good. The other thing is I did have the rear clam on the car, and it turned out the rear clam did clear the fuel neck. I may have to turn it down a little bit for the fitting, and we certainly have enough of a gap between the clam and the back of the supercharger. Let's see, we'll take a peek at one more thing here. Put a little light on. So you can see I've got a good amount of room now between the intake elbow and the roll bar for the seat belts. I'll probably move that bar up just a tad, but you know, I've got plenty of room now to accommodate the seat belts and also do a closeout panel behind that intake elbow. All right, so I think I've done enough. I'm going to start to fabricate a bunch of this stuff off camera, and you know, the next video will either be a product walk around. I've gotten a few products in that people may be interested in seeing, and then I'll show you the sort of the fabricated cooling lines and everything else, but I won't do a step-by-step on those. Okay, well, once again, we'll call it a wrap. Thanks for watching. Take care.